My name is Annie Mae Carter. I'm 81 years old, and I want to tell you something nobody told me before I needed to know it. There are things, not fancy things, not expensive things, just things that stand between a person living alone with dignity and a person living alone with dread. I didn't know what they were until I found out the hard way. Until the morning I sat on my kitchen floor for 40 minutes, not because I'd fallen, but because I didn't know whether I could stand back up. I just sat there, in my own house, listening to the refrigerator hum, waiting to find out what kind of old woman I was going to be. I want to tell you what I found out. I've lived in this house for 31 years. Earl and I bought it when the neighborhood was different, louder, fuller, more children. Now it's mostly quiet. A few people I know, a lot of people I don't. My daughter Linda lives across town. She calls on Sundays, on Thursdays sometimes, if something's worrying her. When Earl passed, it happened in the evening, not suddenly. He'd been declining for a while, that slow kind of going that gives you time to understand what's coming, but not enough time to know how to prepare for what comes after. When it was over, I handled the arrangements. I handled the paperwork. I handled all the people who came through this house with their casseroles and their condolences. I handled it, and then it was quiet, and I discovered that handling things is not the same as being ready for them. I had lived up until that point in a house where there was always someone else in it. Even when Earl and I were barely speaking, and there were stretches of years where we were barely speaking, there was still the sound of another person, footsteps in the hallway, a television in another room, someone who would notice if something went wrong. When you live alone, nobody notices. That is not something you understand until you feel it. And most people don't feel it until something happens, something small or something large. And then they realize, there is no one here to help me. I want to give you the 11 things I had to learn the hard way, because I think if someone had told me, I might have slept a little better in those first years. The first thing is a check-in system, not for emergencies, for every single day. I didn't have one. 3 months after Earl passed, I slipped on the back steps. Not a bad fall, but enough to twist my ankle and sit down hard. My phone was inside. I was outside. I sat on those steps for 2 hours before I was steady enough to get myself back in. 2 hours in the yard, alone in November. Nobody knocked. Nobody called. Nobody knew. After that, I made an arrangement with Denise 3 houses down. She's usually out the door early, walking Kayla to the bus. We made a simple agreement. If my porch light is still on past 8:30 in the morning, she rings the bell. That's all. No surveillance, no fuss. Just a light that says I got up today. It sounds small. It changed the way I sleep. Knowing someone will notice, that's not dependence. That's just being a person in the world. The second thing is harder to admit. You need what I call an outside brain. When you live with someone, there's a second memory in the house. They remember that you already took your pills. They remember that you paid the light bill. They remember what day it is. When you live alone, all of that lives in your head and only your head. I started losing track of things about 4 months in. Not dramatic forgetting, subtle. Standing at the stove and not being sure if I'd turned it off the last time I cooked, even though it was obviously off and I was standing right there. Paying a bill and then calling to check if I'd paid it. Taking 2 of a medication in one day because the bottle hadn't moved and I couldn't remember touching it. I bought a spiral notebook. Nothing special. The kind grandchildren use for school. Every morning I write the date, what I took, what I ate, what I need to remember, what I did the day before. My oldest, Marcus, saw it on the counter once and got very quiet. I know what he was thinking. I told him, a smart person gives themselves backup. Only a fool relies entirely on a mind she never checks. He didn't argue. He's good at not arguing. The third thing is money. Specifically, money that exists only for the fact that you are still alive. Not emergency money. Not the fund for when the water heater goes. Money for the simple reason that you woke up this morning and you are still a person with preferences. I went 8 months after Earl died, spending money only on what I needed. Utilities, groceries, the doctor. And somewhere in those 8 months, I stopped being a person who wanted things and became a person who only maintained. Like a house that's been winterized, still standing, nothing running. Gloria. My sister, the one who still calls just to talk, came to visit, and she sat at this kitchen table and looked at me for a long moment and said, "Annie, have you bought yourself anything in the last 6 months?" I thought about it. I couldn't remember. She said, "That's the first thing that goes. That's how you know." I argued with her, told her it was responsible, told her I was saving for what was coming. She said, "What's coming is more of this, so you might as well enjoy some of it." I set aside $30 the next month, just 30. The first thing I bought was a decent bar of soap, the kind that smells like something, not the plain white blocks I'd been buying for years because they were cheaper. I stood in the shower and smelled it, and I thought, oh, I forgot I was allowed to have nice things. It wasn't $30. It was permission. That's what it was. The fourth thing nobody tells you about, you need what I call a speaking folder. What happens if you cannot speak for yourself? If the ambulance comes and you're not coherent enough to answer their questions? If something happens and your children are making decisions in a hallway and nobody knows what you actually want? I didn't have this ready. A year after Earl died, I had a health episode. Nothing catastrophic, but bad enough that I couldn't answer the paramedics' questions clearly. They had to guess about my medications. They made one wrong assumption that needed to be corrected at the hospital. It wasn't dangerous, as it turned out, but it could have been. I made a folder the week I got home. Bright orange, easy to find. It lives inside the cabinet next to the stove. Inside, my medications and the doses. My allergies. My doctor's name and number. My emergency contacts in order. And a short letter that says what I want and what I don't want if I can't say so myself. Writing that letter was one of the hardest afternoons of my life. But every time I pass that cabinet, I feel something I didn't expect. Not dread, relief. Like I've already handled the worst of it. Like that version of me, the one who can't speak, has already been taken care of. The fifth thing, your kitchen needs to fit who you are now, not who you were. This sounds less serious than the others. It isn't. I kept my kitchen the way it had always been for years after Earl died. Heavy cast iron in the bottom cabinet. Good dishes on the high shelf. The can opener that required real grip strength, the kind Earl used to open without thinking. But Earl wasn't opening it anymore. About 18 months in, I dropped a cast iron skillet, caught the edge of the counter on the way down, which was the only lucky part. After that, I rearranged everything. Light pans, daily dishes at arm height, an electric can opener that my grandchildren find hilarious. A stool so I can sit while I chop. Good knives that actually do the work so my hands don't have to. And I stopped buying the cheapest version of things I use every day. The cooking oil, the coffee, the bread. Because I am 81 years old and I cook for myself 3 times a day, and if I am going to stand in this kitchen, I am going to enjoy it. This is going to sound ridiculous, but the electric can opener genuinely changed my relationship with soup. I used to dread canned soup because of the opener. Now I eat soup whenever I want, like a dignified woman. The small victories, I'm telling you. The sixth thing is honesty. With yourself, about your body. When you live with someone, there is a witness. Someone who notices you're moving differently, that you don't look right, that you've mentioned that same pain 3 times this week and you keep saying it's nothing. When you live alone, there is no witness. I ignored things the first 2 years because I didn't want to be a burden. Didn't want to call Linda over something that might be nothing. Didn't want to make appointments when I wasn't sure anything was wrong. Kept telling myself I was fine, that I was handling it, that I'd see how it went. A persistent ache in my hip I called just aging turned out to be something that needed specific treatment. Caught later than it should have been. Now I write down anything that shows up more than twice. Pain, dizziness, anything that changes. If it appears 3 times in my notebook, I call the doctor. No debate. Just 3 times and I call. It's a rule I made for myself because left to my own judgment, I will wait too long. I know this about myself now. There is nobody else paying attention, so I have to. The 7th thing. You need one thing every single day that has nothing to do with surviving. When you live alone, the days can become purely functional. You wake up, you manage, you maintain, you sleep. And you can go weeks without doing anything that is simply for you. something that has no purpose except that it exists and you wanted it. I started sitting on the back porch in the morning, just 15 minutes. Coffee, the same mug, the same chair. Sometimes the neighbor's cat comes to the fence. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes Kayla waves from down the street before she gets on the bus. Sometimes nobody passes by at all, but those 15 minutes are mine. They don't maintain anything. They don't fix anything. They just mark that the day has started and I'm in it, choosing to be in it. On the mornings when I skip it, when something pulls me inside before I've had those 15 minutes, the whole day feels slightly unmoored, like I started moving before I was ready. It doesn't have to be a porch. It doesn't have to be coffee. It just has to be something you do on purpose every day that says, I'm still here. I'm still choosing. The 8th thing is something I resisted the longest. You need a way to call for help when you cannot get to your phone. I got a medical alert device 2 years ago. I fought getting it for almost a year before that. It felt like the thing you get when you've given up, like the final flag of independence being lowered. Then I had a night, I won't go into detail, where I needed help and my phone was in the bedroom and I was not. And I lay there in the dark calculating how long until Linda would call and notice something was wrong. It was a long calculation. She calls on Sundays. I got the device the following week. I wear it every day. It sits on my wrist like a watch. I've had to use it once in 2 years. But the knowledge that the one time it matters, help is one button away. That knowing has returned something to me that I didn't expect. It's not security exactly. It's a kind of confidence. The confidence to move through my own house without measuring every step against the question of whether I could survive this one alone. The 9th thing is connected to the 8th, but it's different. You need someone who knows to look for you. Not just Denise with the porch light. Not just Linda with her Sunday calls. Someone who has your specific rhythms and will notice when they break. I told Denise, if the light is on past 8:30, ring the bell. But I also told her, if I say I'll bring something over and I don't just assume I forgot. Come check. Denise is not naturally the checking type. She's busy and practical and she moves fast and she has her own life to manage. But she agreed because she's a sensible woman and she understood what I was asking and why. The thing about living alone is this. You can be in real trouble and still look fine from the outside. Your house can look the same. Your car can be in the driveway. If nobody knows your routines close enough to notice when they shift, you can disappear from your own life for days before anyone sees. That terrifies me more than almost anything, so I told Denise. I told her which things are routine and what it means when they're not. She didn't make a big deal of it. She just said, okay, Miss Annie, I'll pay attention. And I believed her. The 10th thing is about connection, but not the kind that requires you to perform. After Earl passed, well-meaning people suggested I join things. Senior groups, church committees, a Tai Chi class that met on Tuesday mornings at the community center. I tried. I went. I sat in rooms full of people and felt completely alone, which is worse than being alone at home because at home at least the aloneness makes sense. So I stopped trying to find connection by going somewhere. I found it differently. I started writing. Not a real diary, more like letters. To Earl sometimes, to my mother, to a version of myself that was young and didn't know what was coming. Letters I'll never send, but the writing puts me in conversation with something, with the shape of my own life, and that feels like connection even when nobody else is in the room. I also started paying attention to Kayla, Denise's daughter, in a way that costs me very little and gives back more than I expected. I don't do much. I'm 81, but I listen when she talks. I sit near her when she does her homework at my kitchen table. I'm still in her life. And being still in someone's life, a young life, a growing life, that threads you to something larger than your own maintenance. That's what I was missing. Not a group, not an activity, just the sense of being in someone else's story as well as my own. The 11th thing is the one I still work on every single day. You need to ask for help before things have fallen apart. Not during, before. Every single time I have waited until something was a crisis, I have lost control of it. The pipe under the kitchen sink. I noticed something strange and watched it for 2 weeks. By the time I called someone, there was damage to the cabinet. If I'd called when I first noticed, it would have been 15 minutes and a $10 part. The same has been true of my health, of my car, of every situation where I convinced myself I could handle it or it would resolve on its own. Because asking for help feels like the beginning of something I don't want to begin. Feels like the first concession. Like the moment you stop being the capable one and start being the one people worry about. But here's what I've had to learn, slowly and against my nature. Asking for help when you still have choices is what preserves the ability to choose. Waiting until crisis is what strips it away. When I ask Marcus to come look at something before it becomes an emergency, I'm still in charge. I decided to call. I described the problem. I'm managing my home. The moment it becomes a disaster and decisions get made in a hurry, that's when I stop being in charge. That's when other people's anxiety starts making decisions for me. I am not there yet. I intend to delay that for as long as possible. And the way I delay it is to ask early before the asking becomes desperate. That is hard for a woman raised to handle things. It is still hard. I do it anyway. These 11 things didn't arrive all at once. I learned them slowly, some of them the hard way, some of them through watching what happened when I didn't have them. I think about the morning I sat on that kitchen floor, waiting to find out what kind of old woman I was going to be. I was 69. I'd been alone for almost a year. I hadn't fallen. I just didn't know if I could stand up, and there was nobody to ask, and I had to find out alone. I got up. It took me a while. I held the counter, and I took my time, and I got up. But the thing I remember most from that morning isn't the getting up. It's the waiting, the quiet of that kitchen. The refrigerator humming, the particular quality of being the only one there. I didn't want to feel that again. So I built things around myself, quiet, practical things that make sure I don't have to. The porch light, the orange folder, the notebook on the counter, the electric can opener that makes my grandchildren laugh, the 15 minutes every morning with my coffee that belong entirely to me. Not a big life, but mine, still mine. And that is not a small thing. After 81 years, I can tell you with absolute certainty, still being yourself in your own house, on your own terms, that is not a small thing. If you've been sitting with me today, thank you. Truly, if any part of this feels like something you've been carrying alone, I'm glad you found it. I'm glad you stayed. If you want to come back and sit here again, I'll be here. Subscribe if you like the company. I'm not going anywhere. Take care of yourself, whatever that means to you.